Hello and welcome back guys. Today we are going to start new story, Being Better, written by Los Ghost 10. So let's begin part 1. The machine. On a Monday morning, Izuku Midoriya left class and walked toward the designer's studio for some adjustments to his costume. He hesitated at the studio door, took a deep breath, and, with a shaky hand, turned the handle. He shut his eyes and braced himself. After a long moment he opened his eyes in surprise that nothing exploded this time and wondered whether Mei was in. Izuku pushed the door open and called that he needed Mei to fix his costume. An unexpected small explosion from inside the workshop knocked him against the doorframe and he slumped, groaning in pain. He told himself he should have kept quiet. Looking up, he saw Mei Hatsume working at a bench. Mei had clearly been dealing with a wardrobe mishap and was busy repairing her gear. Izuku quickly found a spare black tank top on a nearby table and handed it to her. Mei gratefully put it on before returning to her work. Mei turned toward him, grinning with the same chaotic enthusiasm she always had, and invited him to help with something she had been developing. Izuku went quiet, remembering an earlier humiliating test she had put him through and the way friends had stepped in to resolve the situation. He felt awkward but stayed, unsure. Mei explained that the device she had finished was a simulation pod that could provide realistic training experiences to help a user's body and reflexes improve. She described that he could choose the environment and difficulty and assured him that the simulation could not cause real death if he failed. The system would eject him and give him a break until he chose to return. Izuku looked skeptical and made it clear he would report her to their instructor if the test turned out to be inappropriate. Mei waved off his concern and then typed rapidly at the computer, wiping sweat from her brow as she adjusted the settings. Mei told him it was all set and ready. Izuku, the 9th user of One for All, groaned before turning to the machine and wondering what he needed to do and whether he should just get in. Something brushed his face and interrupted him. He caught the item, rubbed his cheek, and composed himself before looking up. Mei smiled encouragingly, and he rolled his eyes as he changed into the provided suit. They were familiar enough with each other that getting ready in front of her was routine. After he finished, he placed his clothes on a nearby table and went to the pod door. Before stepping inside, he glanced back and saw Mei giving 2 thumbs up and a broad grin. The door opened easily. When he set his foot on the pod floor he felt the cold metal underfoot and shivered, but he continued as he settled the mouthpiece and VR headset into place. Once everything was in place, the transparent visor over his eyes went dark and a HRNSS wrapped around his torso, lifting him slightly. He was used to unusual procedures around Mei, so he did not panic when the pod began to fill with a clear fluid. It did not feel like ordinary water, it had a saline and gel-like quality that produced a strange tingling across his skin and muscles. The mouthpiece supplied air through a tube and his ears were covered, preventing the uncomfortable sensation of fluid in them. Mei's voice came through the headset in a calm, almost whispering tone, explaining that everything was fully operational and that the tingling meant his nerves and muscles were being attuned by a strengthening agent in the fluid. She told him not to worry and to enjoy the experience. A brief fear pricked at him as light enveloped his body, and he woke up floating in a dark, featureless void. He asked where he was. A small, fairy-like avatar of Mei with pointed ears appeared and explained that this was the simulator's lobby area, a hub where users could take breaks and SWCH between different worlds. She described it as a way to choose another world if one became boring. Izuku listened and then asked how to get started and how long he could stay. Mei's fairy avatar said she would answer the time question first. She explained that, with the simulator's time dilation set the way she preferred, a user could remain inside for up to a full year, though she would not allow more to avoid overloading the brain. She added that getting started was simple, saying the command for the world menu would bring up the list of available worlds. He was astonished to learn he could stay for a year. Mei gave a teasing, smug remark, saying that a year was the limit because she did not want to risk causing mental harm to her best customer. Izuku considered her words and appreciated that she was thinking about his safety. Before he could dwell on it further, a holographic screen appeared in front of him. He looked at the screen and noted that he only recognized 2 of the options because his friends Denki and Zero played them together. He then asked why the simulator's worlds were presented as video games. Mei smiled with a glint in her eye and explained that she had modeled each world on famous and noteworthy video games. She said the two he recognized were based on popular fighting series and that choosing those would teach fighting styles and reflex training, while the other worlds offered different, more varied experiences. Izuku looked at the list of games and hummed. The games in front of him were, in order, Mortal Kombat, Hard, Street Fighter, Medium, Marvel's Spider-Man, Easy, Batman Arkham Series, Medium Hard, Devil May Cry, Hard, God of War, Medium, Fallout, Hard, Infamous Trilogy, Easy, Mass Effect Trilogy, Very Hard, Metro Trilogy, Extremely Hard, Assassin's Creed, Hard, Resident Evil, Medium Hard. He wondered whether these were pre-Quirk-era titles and thought the originals would be worth a fortune if they existed. Mei, the pink-haired engineer, shrugged and remarked that she had good taste in games. She said new releases felt boring and repetitive to her, and compared the latest sports entry to a game that had barely changed in a century. Izuku laughed at her rant, but he couldn't deny she had a point. Many modern games lacked the character of older titles. He noticed the difficulty labels beside each game and understood they were meant seriously. He then asked how hard the Metro trilogy would actually be. Mei grimaced and explained that it was as much about the mental experience as the gameplay. She warned that some entries presented morally challenging choices that would test him mentally. She recommended starting with something easier, but told him to be careful and take breaks if needed. Her worry made him aware of the seriousness of the simulator. He weighed his options. He could choose something easy to get accustomed to the machine, or push himself in the name of protecting others. After a moment of thought, he made his choice. Izuku said he wanted to choose the Metro trilogy and requested it be set for 1 year, acknowledging that teachers and his mother would probably disapprove. Mei was stunned for a moment, then composed herself and said she would need him to sign a consent form and inform Principal Nizu. She warned that there would be no going back once it started. Izuku insisted he would sign and that he was prepared to push himself to the limit if it would help him save people. After a long pause, Mei sighed and agreed. She told him she was sending the documents and contacting Nizu, and that he would not start until Nizu gave the okay. Izuku nodded and, when the forms appeared on the screen, used his finger to sign his name. He waited for 15 minutes until Principal Nizu arrived and addressed him, amused that Izuku had gotten himself into more trouble on a Friday evening than was expected. Izuku chuckled and asked whether Nizu had heard everything from Mei. Nizu nodded. Izuku noted that the principal's avatar was 6 feet tall with a normal human body and Nizu's usual mouse head. Nizu smiled and cautioned him to be careful. He explained that the program would be mentally taxing and that the body would adapt based on the experiences the user went through, implying physical changes could occur after prolonged exposure. Izuku became curious about that last detail but shrugged it off as a potential bonus. He confirmed that he had signed the papers and given verbal consent and stated that he was ready to become a better hero, whatever the stakes. The principal stayed silent for a moment before saying that they would see him on the outside. He explained that, according to what Hatsume had reported, it would take 8 hours for them on the outside, so they would be waiting for his return. He added that he would remain to monitor Izuku along with Hatsume in case Izuku needed help or had to be removed from the machine. Izuku gave one last nod, selected Metro Trilogy, and in a violet vortex he shifted and appeared in a new place. He found himself in a world where a screen displayed the game's opening. The cinematic showed a character typing on a typewriter while narrating his past. The narrator explained he had been born in Moscow but remembered nothing from that time, that he had been an infant when the old world was destroyed by nuclear fire, and that he and thousands of others had retreated to the metro stations beneath the city. The narrator described 2 decades of life underground, how the metro had become both home and fortress against nightmarish mutants in the tunnels, and how a new threat one day forced them into a war for survival. Watching the cinematic, Izuku learned how the world had frozen after nuclear war and how people had survived in the metro tunnels. The images of people living that way pained him, and the reveal of mutated creatures jolted him fully into the experience. After the cinematic ended and the scene went dark, Izuku was suddenly wearing heavy gear, a helmet, and a gas mask, climbing a ladder after another man dressed the same way. The man above him, gasping between breaths, asked Artyom if, when he had left his home station, he had ever imagined they would end up in a place like this, uncertain whether they were about to save their world or doom it. Izuku did not know how to respond, but the man did not seem to notice and kept talking. Izuku felt strange. He knew he was not actually wearing the gear, yet the sensation of its weight and the constriction of the mask felt unnervingly real. He noticed a gun on his belt and realized he would likely have to learn how to use firearms during the year he would be here. Near the top of the ladder the rung snapped. His companion, already above, caught him and hauled him up. The fear of falling felt all too real. Though he had survived dangerous fights before, this helplessness without his quirk was different. He could not rely on enhanced durability now, he had to be careful. Accepting his quirkless state would not be easy, but he resolved to become stronger. This was the beginning of his journey for the coming year, and he would not give up because of fear. A few hours later, Mei had been keeping watch over Izuku's vitals and was unsure what to expect. His heart rate spiked briefly and then settled, a reaction she attributed to the adrenaline from his time in the simulation. She felt anxious despite herself as she looked at the pod. The pod was covered with systems designed to expose Izuku's body to a controlled growth agent. Normally that would be undesirable, but the fluid filling his tissues was intended to stimulate muscle growth, increase height, and strengthen bone density. Complex components in the pod were also meant to enhance neural activity so that, if pushed, Izuku could process information at extraordinary speed. Mei recognized that all of those effects were long-term goals and that unknowns remained. She worried about how his mind would cope with the stress of the experience and whether it might develop into post-traumatic stress or depression. Even if the simulation was not real, the brain could not tell the difference from how real it felt and looked. Mei was worried for his well-being and anxious to see how he would come out of the pod. The principal glanced in her direction for the 5th time in the last hour and felt the same, but kept his calm, knowing all they could do was monitor the situation and be ready to help when the time came. Nizu took a sip of his tea and asked if it would be possible to put Midoriya's point of view on the screen to see what he was doing. Mei paused to think and then typed at the console. Within 6 minutes, the screen turned on and showed Izuku in a tunnel, exiting with a companion named Bourbon. Nizu looked at the screen and asked if normal speed for them would mean the simulation was running slower than anticipated. Mei shook her head and explained that she was using footage from 5 minutes earlier, which corresponded to a couple of weeks for him. He was still on his way to a year inside the machine, they could only get tidbits of what he was doing from the clips they were watching. The principal hummed in approval and remarked that, from the way Izuku was sneaking around, he had become quite good at stealth. Mei sighed in relief and noted that he was doing better than she had expected. She admitted she was glad he was holding up, the mutants and human enemies were numerous and dangerous, yet he was managing impressively. They watched in silence as Izuku moved past enemies. For now it was mostly mutants due to the level he started on, but he progressed quickly and showed steady improvement. Mei and Nizu continued to monitor clips of Izuku's progress and checked his vitals occasionally. Over the next few hours, Izuku finished the first Metro game, choosing the good ending and spending about half a year inside that game. When the second game started, it showed how Izuku handled a more diverse environment, facing more enemies and using different weapons and gear. As they expected, Izuku avoided lethal force whenever possible, only resorting to irreversible action when there was no other choice. From the beginning of his journey, he met Anna, whose character model Mei had adjusted to resemble Momo Yaoyorozu, and traveled on to seek the little dark one and the last of his kind because the fixed ending of the first game had been a bad one for them. Izuku faced many challenges in the second game and at one point took a break to communicate with Mei and Nizu. Izuku signaled that he was online, and Mei jumped to her feet, pressed a few buttons, and told them that they read him, asking if he was alright. Izuku responded in a soft, tired voice that he was physically fine but that the mental toll was difficult to describe. He said he had been forced into fights that felt real and had witnessed innocent victims and casualties. The betrayals, especially by Pavel, had hit him hard, but he was pushing through. Nizu frowned at the strain his student had been under and told him that if he was not up to continuing, they could stop and let him out of the machine. He stressed that it was entirely up to Izuku and that none of them would think poorly of him for stopping. There was a long silence that felt endless, and then Izuku reported that he would continue. He believed pushing himself to the limit was what made a hero stronger and that this was a test of his will. He would not give up without trying his best. The resolve in Izuku's voice surprised both Mei and Nizu, not only for its strength but because it came from the kind, earnest young man they knew. The principal assured them that Hatsume would put him back in if needed and that they were available if he wanted another break. Izuku gave an affirmative hum and returned to the challenge. He pushed through the levels and, by 2 a.m., completed the second game with the good ending once again. The machine then beeped and informed them that Izuku had spent the equivalent of up to a year inside. The last game of the trilogy would have to wait. Everyone agreed, and the technicians began to undo the panels and drain the liquid. On seeing Izuku's newly enhanced physique, Mei was stunned until Nizu nudged her leg to get her to compose herself. She wiped her face and approached the opening machine with a towel to hand to the green-haired boy, who now looked noticeably older and taller. Izuku took 2 tentative steps and faltered, almost falling forward. Mei caught him in time. He looked up at her, tired and shaken, and confronted her about altering a character model and inserting an inappropriate scene into the game. Mei admitted she had done it because she thought it would be funny and believed it might help him overcome his shyness around girls. He asked why she had chosen that particular model. Mei explained she had not had time to create her own, and that the spouse characters in the game were based on girls she knew he liked. Izuku face-bombed and muttered that of course she would do something like that. Mei smiled, and he dryly noted his sarcasm. Mei fell silent as she inspected his body more closely. When he looked down at the area she studied, he noticed several scars from when he had been in the Metro game. He rubbed at them and asked about them, reminding her that she had said he would only gain muscle and increased reflexes. Using her quirk to examine the skin, Mei determined the marks were only superficial. She explained that some feedback from the muscle growth had manifested scars at the locations where he had been hurt in the game. She said she would try to fix that, but warned that if he entered the game again these scars could appear on his real body and might become permanent. Izuku took a moment to absorb the news and then sighed, saying it was no big deal since he already had some scars. He noticed the familiar stab mark from the first game and began to find other small marks he had not seen earlier. Nizu hummed thoughtfully, wondering how much of one for all Izuku could safely use now and how much the machine had impacted his growth. A few hours later, Recovery Girl arrived, furious at being woken so early and at what Izuku's body and mind had been put through. She scolded him, Nizu, and Mei with a string of harsh words and stern reprimands. After the lecture, Izuku returned to his dorm around 3 a.m., and fell asleep on a bed that suddenly felt too small for his grown frame. The next morning at 7:45, a knock on the door and the voice of the class vice president announced that breakfast was ready. Izuku grunted as he sat up, popped his joints, and told Momo that he would be right down. He did not notice that he had accidentally used a familiar nickname for Momo while she was playing the Metro game, which made the girl nearby blush and walk down the stairs with a dreamy look. Izuku finished a quick shower and dressed in clothes that used to be baggy but now fit much more snugly. Looking in the mirror, he noted that he bore a passing resemblance to his homeroom teacher, Aizawa, and told himself he would have to go shopping for new clothes. He sighed, put on a jacket to hide his newly grown muscles, and went downstairs. At the dinner table he ate without noticing the curious looks from those who had woken early. When Ida finally regained his composure, he asked Izuku what had happened after classes the previous day and why he suddenly seemed taller and more filled out. Izuku swallowed his eggs with a smile and explained that he had taken part in an experiment with Mei that had caused him to gain muscle and height. He described spending a large portion of the day and night in Mei's lab with Nizu overseeing the process. The explanation landed differently around the table. Some, like Bakugu, were indifferent. He preferred action-oriented games and wasn't interested in narrative experiences. Others, mostly the girls in Izuku's class such as Momo, Ochako, Kyoka, and Tsuyu were more intrigued. Momo, who had developed a small crush after seeing Izuku during pool day and who liked muscular physiques, blushed and asked what exactly Mei had made him do. Izuku, now chewing his toast, explained that Mei had him choose a video game from the pre-quirk era and relive everything the main character experienced. He said he had essentially spent a full year inside 2 games from a trilogy he had chosen and had only finished around 2 in the morning. Those details drew different reactions. Bakugu grumbled about fairness and competition. Ochako jumped in, visibly excited, and asked if Izuku's new muscles meant he could use his quirk more effectively. Izuku sighed inwardly, thinking that everyone was making too big a deal of it, while also acknowledging that the experiment had been risky and that concern was reasonable. Before he could say more, Mei ran into the dorms carrying a bag and announced that she had brought him some clothes since his old ones would no longer fit. Ida and Ochako reacted with surprise at Mei's bluntness, and Izuku rolled his eyes, took the bag, and patted Mei's head in thanks. Mei smiled and shrugged at the attention. The others exchanged strange looks, and the girls around the table quietly wondered about Izuku's new appearance. Later, Izuku dressed and examined himself in the bathroom mirror. He noted that Mei's choices made him look more muscular and that he kind of liked the style she had picked. He wore a black long-neck muscle shirt that paired with dark gray cargo pants and white and red boots, giving him a somewhat soldier-like look he had grown to appreciate after his time living as Artyom. He inspected himself taller and more muscular than before and reflected on how the change might affect how others saw him and how he saw himself. He added an old jacket that had belonged to his father before he passed away. It was not much, but with how cold it had been, it would be useful. After putting the jacket on, he went downstairs and greeted Mina Ashido, telling her that Kirishima was already downstairs. Mina gave a groggy thumbs up, showing that she was not a morning person, and he chuckled before walking off to meet Mei. Mei was talking with the other girls about his new nickname, and from their blushing and furtive glances he could tell they were discussing it with more interest than he preferred. He thanked Mei for the clothes and asked why she had done it, admitting that while he was grateful, something about it did not feel right. Mei could not meet his eyes as she explained that she had spoken to Nizu and that they had agreed he should test his new maximum strength. Izuku said that he had planned to test it anyway and asked what the catch was. Under his steady gaze, Mei admitted that the test was based on one used when All Might was a senior and would therefore be extra hard, and that Nizu had invited a few heroes to observe. She then confessed that she had wanted to ask him on a date. Izuku smiled and patted her head, teasing that it had not been so difficult. Mei blushed and suggested they hurry to meet Nizu so they would not be late. He nodded, took her hand, and they left through the double doors, leaving a group of amused and jealous classmates behind. The vice president of Class 2A turned to Kyoka and gave her a stern look, telling her they would follow to make sure no foul play was involved. Kyoka sighed and agreed, preparing to grab what she needed, but Momo promptly took her hand and began to drag her out of the dorms, saying she would handle any preparation with her quirk. Kyoka asked if Momo was not opposed to using her quirk for superficial means. Momo replied that when it came to helping Izuku, nothing was superficial. Kyoka deadpanned and wondered if Momo remembered they had agreed to share him. Later, Izuku and Mei arrived at a mock city where they were to meet Nizu and the guests he had invited. Nizu greeted them and said they could begin, then introduced the lead of the Public Safety Commission, Tsunade Senju, and her assistant, Kana Tsutsumi, also known as Lady Nagant. Tsunade was a tall woman with long blonde hair in 2 braids, and Kana was slightly shorter with short purple hair and a composed, professional demeanor. Izuku and Mei bowed, and the women returned the greeting. Tsunade asked if he was the student who had gone through the video game experiment. He nodded, and Tsunade smiled, expressing that she was looking forward to his demonstration of skill and strength. He blushed slightly at the praise but felt less embarrassed than he once would have, having been hardened by his time inside the simulation. Kana opened a briefcase and took out a rifle constructed by Power Loader. She explained that she would be his opponent for the fighting portion of the test and that the rifle fired advanced foam rounds so it would not cause injury. Izuku, the 9th user of One for All, acknowledged the explanation and asked Mei whether she had brought his suit or if he would be expected to perform the test in his current clothes. Mei shook her head and apologized, admitting she had forgotten in her excitement about seeing his new limits. She said he would have to use his undershirt for the time being and offered to hold his jacket for him. Izuku sighed, nodded, and removed his jacket. He handed it to Mei, who put it on herself. Izuku deadpanned that Mei must have forgotten to get his costume on purpose so he would give her his jacket. Mei admitted it might be true, then urged him to focus, reminding him he had a pro-hero to fight and pushing him forward with a blush at being caught in the act. Izuku rolled his eyes at his personal support gear technician and moved to a spot a little away from Nagant to begin their match, analyzing her and what he knew about her the whole time. He thought that Lady Nagant was a MSTR sharpshooter and marksman whose quirk made her deadly efficient and a real threat. He told himself he needed to be perfect, because any mistake could cost him the fight, and that Nizu certainly knew how to test him. Across from him, Nagant inspected him like a hawk, her hands relaxed and her stance lucid yet ready, showing how professional she was. Izuku recognized the difficulty of the match, but he would not back down, he had never backed down before. He stood his ground with resolve. Kaina's expression showed she was impressed, and Tsunade, watching from the sidelines, looked forward to the fight as well. Izuku felt the challenge to his progress and couldn't help forming a small smirk as he told himself to bring it on. Part 3, Tests and New Guests. Before Izuku and Kaina could start fighting, Nizu cleared his throat and drew everyone's attention with a raised eyebrow. He reminded them that the physical test had to come first so they could get accurate readings. Nizu explained that they were still waiting on Recovery Girl to arrive with the necessary equipment and that he was also expecting a few more guests. Izuku and Kaina both became a little embarrassed at how close they had come to fighting when it was not yet time, while Tsunade laughed on the sidelines and said she had never seen Kaina so flustered. Kaina blushed and protested that it was not that funny. Tsunade wiped a tear from her eye and teased her some more, and Kaina rolled her eyes before she put her rifle away. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck and walked back toward Mei. Mei had an iPad out and was designing the next iteration of his hero costume. He leaned forward and examined the design, which looked intentionally worn for a rugged appearance. He thought it looked pretty cool but felt it was missing something. Izuku asked Mei if she could add a filter component to his mask so gas and other airborne toxins would not affect him. Mei raised an eyebrow and asked why he was asking. She said it already had a filter. Izuku, annoyed, asked why she had not mentioned that sooner. Mei explained that she had put the information inside the pamphlet that came with his suit and equipment and asked if he had read it. Izuku blinked, realizing he had not read the pamphlet and recognized the description of a bulky manual. Mei admitted she might be referring to that. Izuku took a breath to calm his irritation and accepted that it was in the past. He asked whether he should request more features for his gear now or wait until he had more experience to know exactly what he wanted. Mei's eyes gleamed and she giggled as she demanded his ideas immediately. Izuku felt a bead of sweat but complied, offering the insights he had gained from his time inside the Metro games. One idea explained a way to tell when shadows were obscuring him so he could hide more effectively. He also requested a lighter modeled after the games, shaped like a 7mm bullet. He had seen how useful a lighter could be and was determined not to be without one. Mei designed it to be electric and fluid powered in case he ran out of fuel, and she added a built-in microphone for discreet recording. Not knowing what else to ask for, Izuku accepted that for now. He and Mei paused only for Izuku to notice the arrival of another guest. Gran Torino greeted him gruffly, saying he had heard Izuku had improved and that he hoped it had been worth leaving home. Beside Gran Torino stood Toshinori Yagi, and to Izuku's surprise, Mirko ranked number 5 and her friend Ryukyu ranked number 10 were also present. Izuku leaned toward Mei and told her something only she could hear. She nodded and returned to her work. Izuku, who might once have been a full-on fanboy at the sight of Mirko and Ryukyu, felt a small, embarrassed squeak escape him, a reminder that he was still growing into his confidence. Mirko snorted and told her longtime friend that she had found the situation amusing. She had expected a dull watch of a student with potential, but the company present already made it interesting. Ryukyu, noting the group and keeping her gaze on Izuku, admitted that seeing the Public Safety Commission President and Lady Nagant there alongside Gran Torino and Toshinori made the event far more noteworthy. Ryukyu found Izuku interesting, noting the contrast between his youthful face and his developed physique, and she thought the combination made him worth watching. Mirko, her friend from high school, was thinking much the same. Toshinori approached and greeted his student, noting that Principal Nizu had mentioned Izuku had grown and expressing clear worry about the dangerous nature of the experiment Izuku had undertaken to become stronger. Toshinori cautioned that rushing progress could lead to sloppiness and would require adjustment, and he warned that rapid changes could have unknown effects on a teenage body, concerns he hoped Izuku and the inventor Hatsume would consider. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck and explained that villains were growing stronger with no sign of stopping, and that as an up-and-coming hero and Toshinori's student he could not stand idly by while his growth remained slow. He insisted that time was not on their side with a great evil approaching, and that he needed to become as strong as possible so he would not fail when the time came to fight that threat. The two regarded each other for a long beat, both recognizing that the great evil Izuku referred to was all for one. Toshinori sighed, rubbed his temples, and told Midoriya that he could be a little too much like him at times. Izuku smiled and thanked All Might for the compliment. Gran Torino, who had been listening, rolled his eyes and warned the boy that it was meant as a caution. He had taken on All Might's relentless drive to protect others at any cost, and that could become a destructive way to live. Izuku glanced at his other teacher and shrugged, admitting that perhaps it was true but that he could not change who he had become. Torino laughed and smirked, urging him to begin the tests since the equipment had arrived and his bones would not let him stand forever. Izuku nodded and looked over at the test equipment, which had been delivered by a couple of repurposed robots resembling those from the entrance exams and the sports festival. They carried the support department logo in a soft pink. The ninth user of One for All looked at Mei and Mei shrugged, explaining that she had salvaged the machines from a scrap pile after they were damaged during exams. She could not just leave them to rot or, God forbid, be turned into sheet metal. Izuku rolled his eyes and walked to the first machine. It was a heavy-duty hydraulic press with a thick metal plate. Nizu stepped forward and explained the device. He said it was the strength test machine, designed to measure how much pressure someone with a strength quirk could withstand. He added that this particular unit had been used by Yagi in his prime and maxed out at around 5,600 tons, a benchmark no one had surpassed since. Izuku expressed simple surprise at that. Nizu chuckled, and Mirko, wanting to stir the pot, announced that her record on the machine was 967 tons and offered a playful reward if he somehow beat it. The green-haired teen blushed and considered the challenge. He was curious about what would happen if he failed. Izuku asked what would happen if he did not reach Mirko's number. Mirko shrugged and said she had nothing specific in mind yet and suggested a favor that she could redeem later. Izuku considered this, reasoning that Mirko was a pro-hero, so whatever the favor might be it likely would not be unreasonable. He agreed. He then confirmed to Nizu that the primary goal was to test how much of his quirk he could now channel throughout his body. Nizu grinned and affirmed that was correct. He said he was pleased to see that Izuku's intelligence had not faded since his time in the machine and asked him to begin. He would record the percentage. Izuku nodded, closed his eyes, and inhaled deeply. He focused on the energy of One for All, letting it flow through his body. Small sparks of light appeared as he gradually increased the percentage of power he was channeling. He began slowly, moving from 1% to 5, then 10, and reached his old maximum of 15. Encouraged by the lack of pain, he pushed to 20 and felt no discomfort, so he continued. The onlookers watched as Izuku's form became enveloped in energy and electricity, the pressure in the air grew and a few people reacted to the intensity of his presence. Izuku did not notice their reactions and kept powering up. His muscles filled with the quirk's energy, and at around 30% he experienced a sensation similar to using his full strength but without the usual agony, allowing him a clearer understanding of the power. He did not stop there, moving on to 40 and then 45%, which began to strain him. He opened his eyes, realizing this was his new limit, and was surprised to find everyone watching him in shock. Izuku noticed the way they were staring and asked if something was wrong. Mei recomposed herself and commented that he was releasing a presence of power that was both comforting and intimidating in its intensity. The others exchanged curious looks, wondering what she meant. Nizu cleared his throat to regain everyone's attention and asked Izuku about his old percentage and his new one. Izuku, aware of the interest in the room, answered that his old percentage had been about 10% and he could push to 15 with strain, but his new limit was 45%. A stunned silence followed. Nizu revised his earlier assessment, telling Izuku that he had made the right choice in taking part in the experiment. Recovery Girl then smacked Toshinori's shin and chastised him for encouraging reckless behavior. Toshinori apologized quickly, protecting himself from another potential scolding, and the others watched the exchange with a mix of amusement and disbelief. Gran Torino, seeing Recovery Girl occupied, leaned toward Izuku and quietly agreed with the blunt assessment. Although risky, the choice had granted him far greater control. Izuku rubbed the back of his head and accepted the praise with a modest thanks, then announced that he was ready to test his strength. Gran Torino waved him off and Izuku approached the next machine. Nizu, remote in hand, asked if he was ready. Izuku took a steadying breath and confirmed he was. Nizu activated the device and the machine began to exert pressure on Izuku. The floor creaked and small cracks formed in a spiderweb pattern beneath his feet as metal groaned under the strain. Izuku grunted with exertion but held his stance as the readouts climbed. The ground compacted and small depressions formed where his feet pressed down. He pushed as far as he could until the machine registered his shaking and beeped, indicating he could go no further. When the pressure released, Izuku panted and wiped sweat from his brow, then asked Nizu what the result had been. Nizu smiled and revealed his notes, 947 tons. Izuku was shocked and realized he had lost the bet. Rumi smirked, clearly pleased. Izuku admitted he had lost and said he owed Rumi a favor, asking if she had any idea what she wanted. Rumi thought for a moment and said she had an idea, but she would cash the favor in later when she needed him. Izuku nodded and moved on to the next test. Nizu continued to put his new percentage to use, breaking several records along the way. About an hour later, most of the tests were finished. The only event left was Izuku's sparring match against Kana. For his own amusement, Nizu had popcorn and drinks delivered to the audience as the bout was about to begin. Mei munched on popcorn and cheered enthusiastically for Izuku. Rumi laughed like a schoolgirl and joined in the encouragement. Ryuko shook her head but couldn't hide a smile, and Tsunade watched with amusement, the sake she had been given making the scene even more enjoyable for her. She took a large gulp straight from the bottle, wiped her lips, and cheered along with the crowd. Recovery Girl sighed and wondered why so many people inside UA acted so wildly. She could only accept that it was simply who they were. The quieter observers shared her reaction and exchanged uneasy looks at how the three were behaving. They all watched Izuku, whose face had gone bright red, while Kana smiled at him with an amused eyebrow raised. Izuku felt like he might disappear from embarrassment. He wanted nothing more than to escape the moment. He forced himself into a fighting stance instead, knowing he was about to face Kana, who was now giggling at him. Kana teased him with a slightly mocking tone. Izuku pleaded that he did not want that attention. Kana shook her head, then became more serious and told him it was time to begin. Izuku's blush faded and he adopted a mask of seriousness, acknowledging that he was ready. Off to the sidelines, Nizu noticed they were both prepared and raised his megaphone. He counted to 3 to signal the start. In an instant, Kana lifted her rifle and fired. Izuku dodged and crashed through a window into a building, which the audience approved of. They knew that if he wanted to win, he needed to be clever and make his movements unpredictable. Kana remained unfazed. She had seen opponents use similar tactics before. Drawing on her experience, she used her hair like a grappling line, launching herself to higher ground to use her keen eyesight to spot any movement in the quiet streets of the mock city. A sound behind her made Kana roll to the side, narrowly avoiding a kick at her head. When she recovered she swung the rifle to where Izuku had been, but he was already gone, like a ghost in the night. Narrowing her eyes, Kana listened for any clue to his location. When she heard shoes scraping from the room below, she leapt over the building's ledge to escape a powerful kick that created a wind tunnel and sent debris into the air. She thought that the kid was good and grappled again, landing on the roof of a smaller office building. Before she could react, a foot struck her midsection and sent her into the roof entrance. The concrete broke beneath her and the impact knocked the wind out of her lungs, but she kept firing and clipped Izuku on the shoulder. He retreated, then used his training with Gran Torino to hop from building to building until he vanished from her sight. Kana seized the chance to catch her breath, but she knew she could not stay put. Izuku might attack again from beneath. She ran and entered the roof access point where she had just been launched. Confident that Izuku would not collapse a building on her, she used the corridors to her advantage and moved with her weapon at the ready, prepared for whatever direction he might come from. He struck again in the fourth corridor, but this time Kana was prepared. She trained her rifle on him as he bounced and twisted in the cramped space. There was not enough room for him to maneuver fully, and one shot grazed his leg, slowing his pace with the sting of impact. He barely tilted his body in time to avoid a shot to the chest. The miss made Kana pale. Izuku was now within her reach, and she still needed to CYCL the loading bolt before she could fire again. In that moment, she realized she was at a disadvantage. Her last words were a quiet curse. Izuku's punch connected with Kana's chin, sending the sniper unconscious. He stumbled forward and fell on top of her, leaving them both tangled in an awkward heap. Meanwhile, the tipsy Tsunade cheered at the sight, teasing that she had not known Kana fancied such handsome young men and joking about being invited to the wedding. Everyone else exchanged horrified looks and wondered how someone like her could be in charge of the heroes. Momo Yaoyorozu and Kyokajiro, who had been recording the whole incident, watched the holographic feed with rising jealousy, both seething with envy at the attention Kana was getting. Back with Izuku, the teen groaned and pushed himself up, shaken and trying to collect his thoughts. He considered how strong he had been fighting Lady Nagant at just 45% and wondered how much more powerful he could become if he returned to the machine and pushed beyond 100%. His train of thought was interrupted by a groan from the unconscious woman. Deciding to get her to Recovery Girl, he lifted Kana in a bridal carry, exited the building, and powered up one for all to sprint back toward the group. Izuku arrived at the fake city's entrance, set Kana down in front of Recovery Girl, and watched as the elderly hero used her quirk to heal the woman. Kana awakened with a weary groan. Kana complained that she hated that part of Recovery Girl's quirk. Recovery Girl rolled her eyes and replied that Kana could always try not getting hurt. Kana laughed and said she would miss seeing Recovery Girl now and then. She preferred the older woman's company to that of a certain blonde. Tsunade scowled in protest that she was not that bad, and Kana pointed out how many times she had stopped Tsunade from drinking while working that week. Tsunade went quiet and looked away, suddenly embarrassed, while Kana smirked and sat up. Kana praised Izuku for his work, calling him a little rough around the edges but predicting he would become a top-ranking hero, perhaps even the best in the world. Izuku returned her smile and thanked her, saying he needed lunch after working up a sweat. Kana nodded and said farewell, suggesting they might run into each other again. Izuku walked over to Mei, who was wearing a mischievous grin. He raised an eyebrow at her expression and wondered what she was up to. Mei giggled and then laughed, saying she could not wait to work with him again on more inventions, referring to them fondly as her babies. Tsunade and Kana froze at the enthusiastic remark and turned to Izuku with suspicious looks. Flushing, Izuku hurriedly clarified that Mei meant her inventions and that there was nothing romantic going on between them. Tsunade and Kana exchanged skeptical hums before returning to their conversation. Izuku sighed and told Mei that she really was there just to make him suffer. Mei shrugged and said that as a chaotic genius, it came with the territory to mess with people. Izuku rolled his eyes, and when a ping sounded, he turned to see Recovery Girl taking her phone out to inspect it. Izuku watched for a few seconds until the elderly heroine's eyes widened. He blinked in surprise as she turned toward him and rushed over. Recovery Girl calmly informed him that his BLD results contained good news and bad news. Izuku, unsure what to say, let her continue as a worry settled in the back of his mind. Recovery Girl explained that the scars would only be cosmetic and would not cause problems, and that his body, from what she could read, was in perfect health. Mei brightened at that but then frowned and asked what the bad news was. Recovery Girl grimaced and checked the results on her phone, noting that his readings were as healthy as, or healthier than, any 17-year-old she had seen. Izuku frowned at the phrasing. It took him a few moments to understand the implication, but he did not voice it immediately. Nizu then suggested that young Midoriya had aged a full year while in the machine. The room fell into stunned silence. Mei froze in shock and horror, immediately worried that it had been her mistake. She protested that the fluid solution should have only grown muscles and should not have aged him. Nizu cleared his throat to steady everyone and urged them to calm down, pointing out that it was not necessarily as bad as they feared and that, with research from himself and Hatsume, they could likely determine why it had happened and whether it could be fixed. Recovery Girl nodded reluctantly and stated that there was no way to undo the aging effect on his body, which left them with a new dilemma to address. Izuku sighed, rubbed his temples, and tried to make sense of the situation while also reassuring those around him that he was not overly upset. He asked them to try to fix the issue so that he would not age each time he used the machine. Mei, surprised that he was not angry, felt relief and, remembering who she was speaking to, smiled through tears and quickly wiped them away so no one would notice. She promised that they would fix the problem and help him on his way to becoming the #1 hero in the world. Izuku patted her head and expressed his trust in her, insisting that one setback would not keep them down. Recovery Girl exhaled and allowed herself a small smile, thinking it was good that the situation was not as dire as she had feared. She also noted that Izuku's reaction suggested any trauma from the experience was not affecting him as severely as she had initially assumed. Nizu decided to call it a day and said his goodbyes to Tsunade and Kana. Mirko and Ryukyu left for their patrols after making sure Izuku remembered his failure in the bet and that Mirko intended to follow up on it later. The day had been taxing but rewarding. Izuku learned more about his new limits and met remarkable people, and despite the unexpected aging issue he remained relatively positive. A few hours later, Nizu and Mei reviewed the chemical compounds used in the solution and ran several tests to make the machine operate without causing the aging effect, much to Izuku's appreciation. They agreed to make the final installment of the Metro trilogy their last task of the day, and since they had time to play, Mei asked which one he wanted to try next. Izuku admitted he was not familiar with many pre-Quark-era games and had Mei explain a few. When she described Marvel's Spider-Man, a small, approving feeling stirred inside him. What he did not know was that deep inside One for All, the past users were in a stupor at how useful this was for the Ninth to get used to their quirks. Those quirks were very similar to an arachnid-themed hero and would soon manifest. Inside One for All, the fourth and fifth users of One for All, Hikage Shinomori and Daigoro Banjo, exchanged smirks, knowing this was the perfect way to help their newest holder get used to quirks that were about to appear. Banjo asked if Hikage was thinking the same thing. Hikage smiled and indicated that he was. Banjo then reacted with obvious confusion. The other users of One for All reacted with amused exasperation at the strange rapport between the two, but they all agreed this plan would accelerate the Ninth's progress. It helped that some of the games mentioned were favorites of the first user, Yoichi Shigaraki, who punched the air at the news that the Arkham series had a new installment and that it was being mentioned alongside the infamous trilogy. The seventh user, Nana Shimura, was just as excited as the first. She saw great practice in the hover and glide mechanics used in the mentioned games and believed these would help the Ninth learn to manage center of gravity and shift it as needed, which made her smile in a familiar way. In short, this was going to be easier for the Ninth than they had expected, and it was largely thanks to one pink-haired, explosion-prone woman with a fondness for machines. Back with Izuku after finishing the testing and starting the last Metro game, Izuku moved through it with relative ease. The new mechanics were useful but did not drastically change his basic playstyle. The sleeping mechanic to advance the time of day felt odd at first, but he adapted and used it strategically to turn day into night and employ stealth when avoiding fights was preferable. The map was a godsend for navigation and for finding collectibles tied to small side quests for characters on the train inside the game. He completed tasks such as retrieving a teddy bear from a flying mutant's nest and returning a guitar, because it was in his nature to help when asked. The most stressful moments were the tense, non-graphic confrontations, sneaking through the Children of the Forest level without being detected and facing a towering mutant bear in a dramatic, anime-style battle. Both challenges tested his patience and resourcefulness. By the end, Izuku obtained the cure for Momo Anna and survived a life-saving fusion sequence that restored him, which led to the good ending. He admitted to himself that he had cried at the death of Momo Anna's father. Izuku had spent more than a year with the man and respected his sacrifice to save others. When he exited the machine for the second time, Izuku noticed a few more scars but paid them little mind. Mei had said they were still working on repairing those, and he trusted her and Nizu to take care of it. Until then he would persevere and continue to grow stronger. With the second-year sports festival over and work studies resuming soon, he hoped he would be ready for whatever training Gran Torino would put him through. He remained thankful for the chance to work with the old man and often wondered how many of Toshinori's stories were true. Lost in thought, Izuku dressed on autopilot, pulling on shorts and a t-shirt with the words lab coat printed in black on the front. A hand on his shoulder brought him out of his reverie. Mei smiled and asked which game he had chosen to enter next. Izuku smiled and explained that he had been thinking Marvel's Spider-Man would be a good choice because it would help with strength, flexibility, and working in an urban environment. Mei nodded with a smile and said that the female model for the simulation was already finished, so they were set for tomorrow. Izuku raised an eyebrow and told Mei not to put any more of his classmates into the simulations. Mei rolled her eyes and dismissed his concern, assuring him he would enjoy being paired with the gravity user and one of the pussycats. Izuku groaned but did not deny it. He hoped Mei would keep the simulations appropriate. He agreed reluctantly and asked Mei not to go overboard with the powers while he was in the machine. Mei smiled and began ushering him out of the lab, telling him to return to his dorms because she needed to work on the devices he had mentioned and his new suit design. Izuku stepped out and stood outside the support course doors. With nothing pressing to do, he decided to head to the dorms. The walk was short. When he entered the dorm common room, most of the guys were there and, for some reason, none of the girls were in sight. Kirishima called out to him and asked Midoriya to answer a question. Izuku asked what it was. He sat down between Kirishima and Denki on the couch, noting that the TV was off and it felt odd for them to be gathered without it on, but he set the thought aside to relax. Denki patted Izuku's shoulder and explained that they wanted to hear his opinion on something they'd been discussing. He said they had already shared their own views and were curious what Izuku thought. Izuku suspected a trap but decided to play along and asked what the question was. Denki announced that the question was simple: what type of girl did Izuku like? Izuku reacted with surprise, not having expected that direction. Mineta approached from the side and clarified that everyone else had identified as straight, gay, or, in Todoroki's case, asexual, which left Izuku. Mineta said they mostly assumed Izuku was straight aside from Kirishima and Denki, and they wanted to know his orientation and who he might be interested in. Izuku stared in surprise, then looked between Kirishima and Denki and asked why they had thought he was gay. Denki admitted he had assumed Izuku was gay, especially considering how long Izuku had tolerated Bakugo's insults without reacting. He handed Mineta 100 yen in exasperation. Izuku thought the assumption was absurd and declined to comment further. He affirmed that he was straight but said he could not pinpoint a single type. Siro encouraged him not to worry and offered an example, saying he would like to date a relaxed Hispanic woman who enjoyed dancing. He then told Izuku it was his turn. Blushing slightly, Izuku received supportive looks from his friends. He explained that it was difficult to say because all of the girls he had met at UA had unique qualities and personalities that made them special in different ways. Denki then asked whether tall women were Izuku's preference, and Ida promptly scolded him for being off topic. Denki rolled his eyes but reiterated that he was curious whether Izuku was attracted to certain physical traits like height, hair color, or particular personality types. Ida stopped chopping the air, rubbed his chin, and considered it acceptable. He turned back to Izuku, and with so many eyes on him the green-haired young man sighed, thinking he was finished, but apparently he was not. Izuku admitted he had feelings for several classmates, which surprised the others. Sato took a bite of a cupcake and noted that they had lost him partway through, but it was interesting that he liked multiple types. He also wondered what Izuku did not find attractive. The others nodded and listened, recognizing names like Momo, Jiro, Uraraka, Mei, Toru, Mina, Mirko, Midnight, Pony, Setsuna, and Kendo among others. Meanwhile in Momo's room, the girls were blushing, none more than Kyokujiro, who had been next to the sound device Momo had created to listen in on the boys' conversation. Kyoko was stunned that Izuku might feel that way about her. Mina laughed with Setsuna, but Momo covered Mina's mouth before she could continue, telling her not to say vulgar things and mentioning that she had heard Izuku mumble Mina's name as well. Mina shrugged and said she was flattered but wanted to focus on teasing her friends for now. Kyoko muttered and watched Tsu bring Uraraka back down to the ground after a brief, startled float. Kyoko thought that Izuku had mentioned her before Momo or Uraraka, and the idea made her unexpectedly happy. Momo noticed her friend's reaction and smiled, then remembered why she had gathered the girls, to discuss their practical final for the semester. Momo apologized for the interruption and explained that she wanted to hear their thoughts on the exam. Kendo, having calmed after hearing her name mentioned, said she had heard the final might involve robots like last year but refused to assume Nizu would leave the test untouched. Mina shivered and asked if it could still be robots, but the others looked at her with pity, convinced it would be something far more difficult. Mina asked if they were doomed, and the others agreed emphatically. Momo rubbed her forehead and pointed out the only silver lining: they had a month to prepare for the practical exam, so they could focus on their internships for now and train after. Disgruntled groans met that reassurance, which Momo understood. The upcoming exam and the internships would both be challenging. Nizu would push them to their limits, and only time would tell whether they would be ready. Part 5, Temporary Costume and Internships. The week began in Class 1A gathered at the train station to head to their internships, some more excited than others. Mina, Uraraka, Mineta, and Toru were the most enthusiastic, while a few Todoroki, Bakugu, and Izuku were noticeably less so. Todoroki and Bakugu's attitudes were nothing new, but Izuku seemed odd because he was already wearing a hero costume that was not his usual one. His old costume no longer fit after his recent growth spurt, and Mei was still working on completing his new outfit. So instead Mei had let him borrow something she had made a little while back when she was struck by inspiration while playing a pre-Quark-era video game. Flashback: Izuku walked to the support studio before classes. The class would be leaving for their internships in about an hour, and he was heading to Gran Torino's home. He had a practical problem. He did not have a hero suit to wear at his internship and needed something to avoid being mistaken for a civilian while on patrol. With a cautious hand he opened the studio door and stepped inside. He realized quickly why there had been no explosions. Mei had fallen asleep at her work table with a blowtorch in one hand and a sheet of metal in the other. Izuku chuckled and went over to the usually energetic inventor. He gently shook Mei and reminded her that she was not supposed to sleep at her work table. Mei blinked groggily and asked if it was him. Izuku smiled and, without thinking, rubbed her cheek and urged her to let him help her to bed. Mei whined softly but did not resist when he took the blowtorch and the metal from her. He pulled her chair out enough to slip his arms under her legs and back, lifted her, and carried her to the sleeping cot kept for her in the studio. He laid her down carefully and pulled the covers over her. He noticed a rare, small, genuine smile on her face, and for a moment they shared a quiet, affectionate exchange before they were interrupted by a clear throat. Power Loader stood to the side, holding a box of donuts and a phone, watching them with an amused, deadpan expression. He said he found the situation awkward and asked why Izuku was there so early and whether he needed something for his internship. Izuku explained that he did. His old costume had become too small after a growth spurt, and he did not think Mei had finished the new one yet, so he needed a spare costume for the time being. Power Loader nodded in understanding and set the box of donuts down, taking a bite of a powdered one as he asked for details about what Izuku needed. Mei, who had been listening, began to shake with excitement and jumped up from the cot, heading straight for her workstation. Izuku reached out and gently stopped her, and Mei turned to him with a raised eyebrow. Izuku gave Mei a stern look and told her she needed to sleep. Mei pouted and protested softly. The sadness in her voice almost made Izuku cave, but he stayed firm and asked her to lie down and rest, promising to spend time with her when he returned. Her expression brightened immediately, she hugged him and returned to the cot humming as she made herself comfortable. Nearby, Power Loader stood with a donut near his mouth, stunned that Izuku had calmed Mei and offered to spend time with her. He declared that Izuku was the chosen one who could save him from his eternal tormentor. Izuku raised an eyebrow, shrugged at the strange reaction, and then asked about a temporary costume. Power Loader recovered from his surprise and admitted he had nothing ready and could not make anything before Izuku had to leave. Mei, now lying back with 2 pillows and holding a body pillow, said Izuku could use something she had made earlier in her personal workroom near the VR equipment. Izuku and Power Loader exchanged a look, shrugged, and went through the double blast-proof doors to find it. Mei called out that it was in the corner inside a giant steel box. They approached the box and examined the keypad. The box scanned Izuku, the keypad lit green, and the container hissed as it expanded and shifted open. What unfolded inside made both Izuku and Power Loader stare in disbelief. Izuku asked when Mei had found the time to build it. Mei explained that she had made it the week she started at UA and had upgraded it over time, making it quite high-tech. Power Loader inspected the armor closely and asked if there were any downsides, wondering about cooling, joint restriction, or similar setbacks. Mei smiled and said there were none of those issues, only the weight was a concern, but Izuku could handle it based on her tests the day before. Izuku ran his fingertips over the suit and asked how much it weighed. Mei answered that it was roughly 1,000 pounds, about half a ton. Power Loader reacted with disbelief. Izuku noted that he would only need 1 or 2% of his quirk to move normally in it and that without his quirk it would slow him a little, but he would manage. Power Loader, overwhelmed, muttered about crazy UA students and walked off grumbling. Mei began helping Izuku into the suit and explained all of its features as she assisted. The flashback ended. Izuku stood in the suit and examined his armored-gloved hands. The armor was unfamiliar but fit snugly, and thanks to his increased strength he barely felt its weight. Passers-by and classmates glanced his way, whereas those looks would once have made him blush, his newfound maturity left him unaffected. The atmosphere was light until Kyokujiro approached and teased Izuku that heavy armor did not seem like his usual style. Izuku turned toward her and, a little surprised, admitted that he had not asked for the armor and then asked if she had changed her hero costume. Kyoka smiled and described the updates to her outfit. The sleeves were a bit shorter and more padded, she had adjusted her makeup, and, favoring a punk look, she had swapped her pants for cut denim shorts and sturdy knee-high boots. Izuku noticed the changes and admired her new look, feeling suddenly shy and a little awkward as he tried to find the right words. He stammered that it looked nice on her. Kyoka twirled an ear jack and suggested they all hang out once the internships were over, offering to ask Momo if she wanted to join them. Izuku agreed that sounded good but mentioned he would have to schedule around a promise he had made to Mei to help with some inventions when they returned. Kyoka said she did not mind waiting and that she would check with Momo. At that moment, Momo Yaoyorozu stepped up and asked if Kyoka had been calling her. Izuku and Kyoka turned to see her approaching, and Izuku immediately noticed that Momo's costume had been altered in a more protective, practical way. He wondered whether the new material had been chosen to accommodate her quirk. Momo blushed and explained that the fabric had been switched to a DNA-compatible material that allowed her quirk to pass through without tearing, and that her parents had helped make the change after Izuku had mentioned the possibility. Izuku quietly acknowledged that it made sense. Momo and Kyoka giggled at his reaction, which only made Izuku blush harder under his helmet. Kyoka then reminded Momo that they were planning to hang out after internships, and Momo beamed with excitement, eagerly agreeing to join them. Izuku, without thinking, patted Momo's head and welcomed her, saying they would plan it once everything was settled. Momo's cheeks flushed as she thanked him. The warm moment was broken when their teacher, Shota Aizawa, cleared his throat and called the class to attention. Aizawa warned them to behave and specifically singled out Midoriya and Bakugo. Katsuki Bakugo objected, insisting he should not be lumped together with Midoriya, but Aizawa explained that of the entire class those two attracted trouble most, mainly Midoriya, with Bakugo drawing attention because of his personality. Both students shifted awkwardly, unable to deny the truth in the observation. Aizawa reminded everyone of their responsibilities during the internships, wished them luck, and told them to stay safe. The teacher turned and began heading back to UA, leaving the students to board their respective trains. Some boarded immediately, others waited for later departures. Izuku stayed behind with the few classmates who were waiting because his train had not yet arrived. Momo and Kyoka had already left, so he had no one to talk to until a girl from Class 2B approached. Pony, who was a foreign student, introduced herself in halting English and stumbled over her words. Izuku smiled warmly beneath his helmet. He gently corrected her, explaining that she should use his family name rather than his given name and offering a suggestion for the phrasing. Pony's shoulders slumped with disappointment because she had thought she had gotten it right. Izuku patted her head and reassured her that she had improved a great deal since arriving at the school. The petite girl brightened and, blushing, suggested they spend some time together so he could teach her more. Izuku agreed, but said it would have to be after they returned and he had finished hanging out with Mei, Momo, and Kyoka. Pony eagerly agreed to wait for her turn. Izuku chuckled and patted her head a few more times, then noticed his train arriving. He told her he had enjoyed talking and that they would see each other back at school. Pony waved him off. When he stepped onto the train, it groaned under his weight and drew several glances. He apologized sheepishly as it pulled away. Half an hour later, the ride had felt unusually quiet and dull compared with Izuku's time in the city, and the monotony was beginning to get to him. When he stepped off and headed toward Gran Torino's house, he noticed the attention he was drawing. His armored costume was conspicuous and his boots clanked against the pavement. A few minutes later he reached the dilapidated house. He braced his arms to block any incoming kicks and kept his eyes trained for movement, though none came. He did not lower his guard, he knew better than to relax around his trainer. The retired hero praised him, noting that it had taken Toshinori months to learn to keep his guard up and that he still sometimes forgot. Izuku looked up to find Gran Torino was not alone. The rabbit hero Mirko, whom he had met the day before, stood nearby. Izuku wondered what Mirko was doing there. Mirko explained that she had been visiting her grandfather and, upon seeing Izuku arrive, decided to stick around to spar and help with his training. Gran Torino scoffed and teased that Mirko could not teach the boy anything with such a stubborn head, then said he had a question for Izuku. Rumi called to her grandfather, and Izuku replied that he was ready. Gran Torino approached while Izuku kept his guard up and told him he could lower it because he was not going to kick him just yet. Izuku said he preferred to remain cautious even when asked to relax. Gran Torino laughed and remarked that Izuku was smarter than their muscle-headed teacher, who had fallen for the same trick on multiple occasions. When Izuku prompted him to get to the point, Gran Torino asked about the change in Izuku's outfit, recalling that Izuku had previously worn a green jumpsuit and now appeared to be wearing armor rather than spandex, inspecting the suit closely. Izuku explained that the armor his support technician had recreated was based on a video game from the pre-Quirk era. Torino rubbed his chin and asked if Izuku meant the pink-haired girl and whether the gear gave him any advantage in a fight. Izuku recalled what Mei had told him and explained that she claimed the suit generated an energy shield capable of blocking the most lethal blows. He added that the outer plates were made of tungsten steel and the bodysuit underneath was a breathable fabric that resisted both heat and cold. He also said the heads-up display showed his position on the local map and indicated how much shield remained before it needed to recharge. Rumi reacted with surprise and amusement, exclaiming that the system sounded wildly overpowered. Izuku admitted that Mei was a miracle worker when it came to things she loved to work on. Torino rolled his eyes and told Izuku to hurry to the training room. he said he needed to get him up to snuff before sending the two of them out together. Izuku questioned the mention of a changing room and asked who Torino meant by, "you two," but Torino interrupted him with a quick, controlled kick that Izuku blocked. Torino ordered him to stop talking and get moving. Izuku snapped to attention and saluted, assuring Torino that he would follow orders. Torino smiled and said he liked that attitude and that this time he would not go easy on him. Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine but returned a confident smile beneath his helmet and told Torino that he could take it and not to hold back. The older hero felt his adrenaline spike at the challenge and called for Rumi to fetch his special fighting gloves. Rumi paled at the implication and hurried off, thinking that the kid was in for a rough time but admiring him for getting the veteran into a fighting mood. She worried whether he would last once Torino went all out and braced herself for the worst.